We begin today at the Mishnah towards the bottom of the Kuf Hey Amud Beis. Zok Heilige Mishnah, Makabel Sadeh Mechaverai, a person that receives a property to work in for his friend. Va'achla Chagov, and grasshoppers came and ate up all the produce. Oy Nishtafa, or there was a storm, a hurricane that destroyed the whole crop. Im Makas Medinahi, if this is something that was a destruction, a disaster in the entire country, he can now deduct from the payment of the rental that he owes to the landowner. If this is not a makkah, if this is not something which is a disaster for the whole country, then he can't deduct from the payment, because the landowner could say to the worker, listen, it's your bad luck, it happened just to you because you're working in the field, and therefore you're not allowed to deduct from what you owe me. Now, obviously, this Mishnah is talking about specifically a chaycher, which is someone that pays a certain set percent from what he's working in the field. If we were talking about a person that gives a percent of what the field actually produced, what it says in the Mishnah is irrelevant, because he just gives a percent, whatever percent of what the field actually produced. Rabbi Yehuda says that there's a distinction here. In Kibla Imenu B'mois, this chaycher, so there's two ways how you have a chaycher. Usually a chaycher gives a certain percent, a set percent of the produce of the field, no matter what it produces. But then you have a chaycher that actually pays money. It's basically a rental, and he pays not from the produce. Then, even if there was a disaster and it was for the whole country, but nevertheless, he cannot deduct from the amount that he gives for the rental, because that's money. And the disaster that happened in the field and in the area has nothing to do with the set price that there is, the money that he made up to give him. What does it mean it's a disaster for the whole country, for the whole area? Rabbi Yehuda says, if most of the valley, where all these fields are, were destroyed by a wind, by a storm, that's considered to be a disaster in the whole area. Ula says, if there was a wind that destroyed the four properties that are around the four sides of this field, that's already considered to be a disaster for the whole area. Now, Ola said, based on his opinion, in Eretz Yisrael, they asked the following shaila: Nishtaf telem echad al penei kula. Mai. What's if not the four entire properties on the four sides of the field were destroyed, but one row around the entire circumference of the field was destroyed? So is that considered to be that this is a disaster in the area because all the sides of the field were also destroyed? What's if the case is the opposite? Nishtayer telem echad al penei kula. What's if the fields surrounding this middle field were destroyed, but there's a row around this entire field that was not destroyed? So do I say because it was not destroyed, mahu, maybe it's not considered to be a disaster of the area because there's still a row around his fields that remained intact? Another shaila, afsika bira mai. What happens if most of the area around there was a disaster, but around this field here, there are other fields that are not planted at all. Bira, they're empty. So according to Ola, we said the main point is you look at the fields around this middle field here. But what's if the fields around are all empty? So, over there, obviously, any disaster that hit did not affect anything because it was not planted there at all. So, what's going to be the halacha? Do you say the fact is around his field there's no disaster, or do you say of course there's no disaster because they weren't planted? If they would have been planted, they would have been affected as well. Another shaila aspastemai. What's if in the fields that were around this middle field, what was planted over there is not the regular, not grain, but it was planted there aspasta, which is basically what's used for animal field. And that aspasta was not destroyed. So, and that separates between this field and all the other fields around that were destroyed. Do I say that, so what's the halacha in such a case? So do I say that these fields around were not destroyed? Or do I say, if it would have been planted with regular tevuah, it would have been destroyed together with all the other tevuah around, so it is considered to be a disaster for the entire area. Zera acher mai. What's the halacha? If you're going to say that regarding the aspasta, because it's not regular tevuah, so it's not considered to be that it separates from the disaster of the whole area, and it's still considered to be a disaster for the whole area. But what's if in those fields around this field, it's not just animal feed that's planted there. It's there are other produce that's planted there, but not the same produce as this field in the middle. And this field around and around, that's a different kind of produce, did not get destroyed. So what's the halacha in such a case? Do I say that because it's a zera acher, so therefore it's different, it's a separate thing? The fact that it didn't affect it, so it's not a raya, it doesn't mean that this separates from the disaster in the whole area. If it would have been the same tvuah, then the disaster would have affected it. Or do I say no, the fact is that these fields around did not get affected, so therefore the field in the middle is not considered to be an area where there's a disaster in the whole area. Another shaila further, the Gemara says, if it's chiti legabe sa'irim, if you have wheat and barley here, so let's say the inside field is wheat and the fields around are barley, and they did not get destroyed. Do I say kizera achadami, that when it comes to wheat and barley, they're considered to be two different kinds of grains, and therefore the fact that one was destroyed and the other was not, so I say that because it's another grain, so therefore it didn't get destroyed. But if it would have been the same grain, it would have got destroyed. Or do I say it's not considered to be like a different zera? It's considered to be wheat and barley are both grains that are considered to be the same thing, and therefore if the fields around, which are from barley, did not get destroyed, it's not considered to be a disaster of this area according to Ola. Another shaila, how about if kol oilam kula b'shidafin, the whole area around is, so what they suffered from is a local disaster of a wind, of a big storm. But Vishaloi, his field there in this valley, in the middle, what does he suffer from? B'yerakin. His field got dried up, didn't have enough water, and it got dry and yellow. The leaves get yellow and they dry. So there is a disaster in the entire area, but not the same disaster. Inami, or the opposite, everyone else is suffering from the wet, from the dryness, and it gets yellow. And his field had a storm, and the wind knocked everything down. Samai, what's the halacha? Do you consider it to be a disaster area, and therefore you can deduct from the amount that he's supposed to pay to the landowner, or not? Since it's different, so it's not considered to be a disaster in the whole area. It's just his mazel, it's of his bad field, and he can't deduct from the payment to the landowner. Teiku, the shilas remain unresolved. Gemara continues with more shilas. Amalei, if the landowner said to the worker, Zara chiti, plant wheat, v'azalhu, and this worker went, v'zara sari, and he went and he planted barley. V'ishtadov rube de baga, and now there was a storm, a wind in most of the valley. V'ishtadov nami hanach sari delay, and these barley in this property also got destroyed. So what's the halacha in this case? Mi amrinon, do we say, the owner says to the renter or the worker, ilu zarata chiti. Or sorry, let's start that again. This is actually the renter that says to the owner that ilu zarata chiti, if I would have planted in this field wheat, it would have suffered the same disaster that happened in this whole area. So this is considered to be a disaster in the whole area that I could deduct from the payment for you. Or perhaps, the Gemara says an interesting svara. The owner could say to the worker, ilu zarata chiti, if you would have planted, like I told you, to plant wheat, have a mekayim be, then what would have been fulfilled regarding me in this field was that tigza oime vayakim loch. When you decree, Hashem does for you. Meaning that when you daven for something, Hashem listens and answers. So the landowner here is saying, when I davened for this property, I was expecting that there's wheat here, and I davened that Hashem should save my wheat. And instead, there wasn't any wheat here. There was barley. So therefore, my property wasn't saved. Because you switched from what I told you to plant there, so my tefillah was not answered, and therefore, it's your fault that you planted something different than what I told you. So the Gemara actually accepts this svara. It's logical to say, the landowner could say, if you would have planted it wheat, that Eibusher would listen to your tefillahs and your ways will be illuminated with light. Another case, nishtatfu kol sadeisav shel machker. What's of this? Landowner, all of his fields, not only in this area, in different areas, wherever his fields are, all of his fields got destroyed. Ve'ishtadav nami hobadayu. And now this field here, which is being rented out now to this worker, was also destroyed as well. And v'loy ishtadav ruba de bage. And most of the fields in this valley, where this field is, where the worker is working, did not get destroyed. So what do we say in this case? What are the svaras here? So do we say, since most of the fields in this valley did not get destroyed, he can't take off from the pay that he's supposed to give to the landowner, because it's not considered to be a local disaster in the area, because most of the fields in the valley did not get destroyed. Or do we say, Kivin de Shtadef Kulu Arase? Since we see that all of the properties of this landowner got destroyed, so Matzi Omale, the renter could say to him, Hi, Mishum lo sachti dachu. As you see, this is your bad luck, because we see that all your properties, wherever they are, got destroyed. So therefore, I can deduct from the money that I said I would give you, because it's your bad luck that happened over here. So this the Gemara says, Mistavra, it's actually logical to say, the Amalei, that the landowner can answer him and say that no, the fact that this field got destroyed is actually not my bad luck, even if it's all my fields in all areas that got destroyed. And the reason is because if it was because of my bad luck, have mishtayli porte, then there would have been a little bit of the field that wouldn't have been destroyed. Something would have been left over for me. Why? Because we see this is the way Hashem does things. When Hashem punishes someone and he destroys all of his properties, he doesn't destroy everything 100%. He leaves over something. The pasuk says, that even when Hashem punishes, the Eibusher says, I leave a little bit from everything that you had. So therefore the landowner says, the fact that you see that all of my fields, everything got totally destroyed, it can't be a bad luck that the Eibusher is punishing me, because if that's the case, something would have been left over. So it's something else that caused this to happen, not my bad luck, and therefore he cannot deduct from the payment that he's supposed to give the landowner. Now the Gemara asks, what happens if the opposite happened? What's if this worker, this renter, he has properties here and in other places, he's renting here this property, and he has properties in other places, all of his properties got totally destroyed. And over here, also in this valley, most of the fields got destroyed. This field as well that this person is renting here in this valley also got destroyed. What's going to be the halach in this case? So do we say, since most of the fields in this valley got destroyed, so that's a local disaster, so then he can deduct from the pay to the owner, or I say, no, I see that this is the bad luck of the renter, because since I see that all of the renter's fields here and in other areas all got destroyed, so the landowner could say to him, I see that this is your bad luck, because all of your fields got destroyed, not only this one that you're renting from me, but in other areas as well. Now, this the Gemara says, Mistabre, here actually we do accept what the landowner claims, and the Amalei, that yeah, it's logical, we accept what he's telling him, Mishum L'Sachu, that it is the bad luck of the renter, as we see that his field, not only here, but in other areas also got destroyed. Now here the Gemara asks, why don't we apply the svara that we mentioned before? Why do we say this? Over here also, we should say back to the landowner, if it's mine, the renter's bad luck, who, if that's what it is, have a mishtayli porta. So then there should have been something left of my properties. Shouldn't have been all totally destroyed. Because then, as this is the way the Eibusher conducts when he punishes someone, that he leaves over a little bit. So why can't the renter here say, just like the Gemara before said regarding the landowner, the fact that all my properties got destroyed shows that it can't be a result of my bad luck. So then it wouldn't have been all destroyed. So here the Gemara answers, no, here we don't apply that, mishum da'amalei. Because the landowner could say to him, midi, if you were worthy that something should remain of your fields, so then there would have been something from your fields that were left over. Something from your field somewhere else that would have been left over. The fact that something from your fields were not left over, that shows that it actually is your bad luck. And over here we don't compare it to the case by the landowner. Taisus over here explains more why we don't compare the two, but over here the Gemara does accept this svara and say that it is the bad luck of the renter that therefore he cannot deduct from the pay that he owes to the landowner. Meisvei, the Gemara asks over here on these opinions. We said over here different opinions when we consider it to be a real disaster that he could deduct from the pay of the landowner. So there's a Mishnah that says, Hoisa shnas shedafen v'yirakin oishvius. Okay, what this Mishnah is talking about is the halacha in the time of Yovel is that when you sell a property, you can redeem the property, but you could only redeem this property after the 2 years are up from the sale. So how do we count 2 years? If it was a year where there was a shadafin, where everything was dry, became yellow. Sorry, again, shidafin is the wind, when it became, everything got destroyed from a wind. Or v'yirakin, everything became yellow and dry. Oy shvius, or within those 2 years, there was a Shemitah year. Oy shahayu shanim kishnei Eliyahu. Or there were years, like in the time of Eliyahu, when there was no rain at all. So nothing grew. So then, we don't count any year that had this condition in it from the number of years. It has to be 2 years before you come to redeem. So now the Gemara says, what do we see over here? It's giving here an example of whether a wind, whether it got dry, similar to what happened at the time of Eliyahu when there was no rain and it didn't grow at all. And if so, what we see here is just like in Eliyahu's times when it didn't rain, it didn't grow at all. Over here as well, when we say that we can't count a year or 2 years towards this, that now you can come and redeem it, it has to be a time when it didn't grow at all. Aval, however, the Bachir adds, if there is any tvua here, salkele, then we do count it. And we're not going to say that this is considered to be a disaster of this whole area, and therefore you can't count that as part of the 2 years. So over here before, what did we say? Over here we said that if most of the valley didn't grow, or if the fields around it didn't grow, over here we gave a different shir to say that it's considered to be a makas medina. But from this Mishnah there, it's mashma that when it comes to not counting the time, that it's a time that things could grow, it has to be mamish, like in the times of Eliyahu, where there's no rain and everything it dries up, it does not grow at all. So the Gemara answers, we can't compare our case to that case in that Mishnah. There it's different. The Omakra, there, when the Pasuk says that you have to wait 2 years until you can redeem your property, the Pasuk says, B'mispar shnei tvuos yimkerloch. In the number of 2 years where there's tvuos growing, he sells you. Which means, shanim sheyesh ben tvua ba'olam. If it's 2 years that there's anywhere in the world that there's a tvua that's growing there, so then it's considered to be 2 years that you can then go and redeem. So dafka there we say that it has to be a situation where it's similar to the way it was by Eliyahu, where there was no rain at all, and therefore nowhere did it grow any tvua, then you say that it's not counted over those 2 years. But over here though, we're not talking, it doesn't say such a pasuk regarding the case we're talking about here with a renter. As long as there's a disaster in the whole area, we say that it's a makis medina and you could deduct from the payment. So Rav Ashi asks Rav Kahana, if you're basing on this pasuk, that it has to be dafka a situation where there's no tvua ba'elam at all in this year. So if so, elamayata shvius. In the Mishnah there it mentioned if one of the years was Shemitah as well, that we can't count that year. But according to what we said, even Shemitah talaloi minaminyan, it should be counted as a year that he could later come and redeem. Because during Shemitah, even if in Eretz Yisrael you're not allowed to plant and nothing grows, but in Chutz La'aretz it will grow. So it's still a time where somewhere ba'olam there is tevuah still. So then why are we saying that if one of the years are Shemitah, we don't count that year? Answers the Gemara, Amalei, Shvies, Avkata de Malkihi. Shemitah is a different story. Shemitah, the Eibishter, the king, removes your ability to plant at all. The year of Shemitah cannot be counted at all. When it comes to other years where it's possible for you to plant, Elamai, there could be a disaster, and there's another area where it's still growing, so then it's considered to be a place or a year or a time that is still possible for there to be mispar tevuos. There is still tevuos somewhere in the world. Shemitah is not counted at all. Shemitah, the Torah says you can't plant that is for a yid, it's not counted at all. So now based on this, that we just said that Shemitah is not counted, so the Gemara asks from a different halacha, from a different Mishnah. If that's the case, Shvi'is, when it comes to Shemitah, it should not be counted when it comes to deduct from the payment that you have to give. What this Girua is talking about is a person that was makdish, his de'achuzah, his property to hektish. So in the pasuk it says, when you want to redeem a property that you were makdish to hektish, there's a certain set amount that you have to pay to redeem it. What's the set amount? 50 shkalim for the 49 years that you can give it to Shemitah, give it to hektish, that is. After Yovel, it leaves hektish automatically. But for those 49 years that it stays by hektish, if you want to redeem it before Yovel, you have to pay 50 shkalim. So if it's 50 shkalim for 49 years, and you count all 49 years, it comes out to be, per year, it's going to be 49 shkalim and a pundyain, which is a little bit more than the shekel, because it's 50 shkalim for 49 years. But now the Gemara is asking over here, why are we counting it this way? There's years of Shemitah, there's 7 years of Shemitah in between. So if there's years of Shemitah in between, we shouldn't even be counting the years of Shemitah, because that's a year that you just said, Afkata the Malki, you can't plant it all. Right? The halacha there is, every year that goes off from the number of years that you're holding by closer to Yovel, so you deduct 1 shekel of the amount that you have to pay to redeem. So if it's 49 years, you give 50 shekalim. If it's 48 years, you give 1 shekel less. Every year closer to Yovel, you give 1 shekel less. But the question is, why don't we deduct also the years of Shemitah? And then it should come out that it's really only 42 2 years here, and therefore per year it shouldn't be a shekel and a punyan. It should be more. Rashi says it would come out to be a sela and a dinner, a shekel with a dinner, just about. So alamet now, why did we learn in the Mishnah? Noisen sela o punyan l'shana, that it's a sela, which is a shekel, plus a punyan for the year, because we count 49 years, 50 shekalim for 49 years. Why aren't we deducting the years of Shemitah? So he answered him, Ravina said, there's different. Shani Asam, there in that pasuk, it doesn't say anything about tfuah growing. Over there, even in the year of Shemitah, the property is useful, because the chazia, le'mishtacha ba'peri, it can be used to store things, to spread out fruits there, even if you can't plant during Shemitah, but it's still useful for something. So therefore, we do count all the years of the 49 years, including the years of Shemitah. Amar Shmuel, now going back to what it said over here in our Mishnah, that if there was a disaster, a disaster in the whole area, you could deduct from the pay to the landowner. So Shmuel says, that if you planted, it grew, and now there was a disaster, grasshoppers came in the area and ate up in this field. But if he didn't plant yet, so then we don't say that he can, that if there was a disaster in the area and there was grasshoppers all around, but over here in this field, though, he didn't plant anything, so then we're not going to say that he can deduct from the payment to the landowner. Because the Amalei, the landowner could say to the renter, Ilu zarata, if you would have planted here, have a mekayim be. Then maybe it would have been fulfilled with me what it says in the pasuk, Lo yevoishu be'esra, it will not be dry in a bad time, it will be made of oven yizbu, and even in days of hunger, they'll still be full and satisfied. So basically what the landowner is saying is, don't tell me because there's a disaster in this whole area and grasshoppers attack this entire area, so what difference does it make if I plant it or not? There's a disaster in this area, so I could deduct from my pay for you. No, the landowner says, how do you know that if you would have planted here, Hashem would have made a nest for me, and over here, my property would have been saved from these grasshoppers. You didn't plant, but if you would have planted, you would have seen that it would have been a nest for me. So therefore, you can't deduct from the payment. Also, Rav Sheshes asked on this, we had before here in the Masechta, the shepherd, so he's taking the sheep out to graze in the field, and he left the sheep alone. Ubalir came into the city. A wolf came and attacked, or a lion came and attacked them. So now the question is he responsible? So and we don't say that if he was there, he could have saved the sheep, and therefore if he went away, it's his responsibility. Rather, we have to evaluate the situation here. If he was there and he had the ability to save from the lion or the wolf, then it'll be chayev because he left. He should have been there. If anyways he couldn't have saved from the lion or the wolf, pater. So then the fact that he left is not the cause of what happened. So then it's going to be pater. So the Gemara says, why can't the owner say to him, "V'amai name milei"? Why shouldn't we tell him, "Ihavis hasan"? If you were there, have a mekayim be, then Hashem would have given you the power to save these sheep because it would have been fulfilled in me. That is for the land, for the owner. Some are is Bach, because it's the shepherd that would be fighting against this wolf and the lion. That gam esari v'gam adoiv hika avdecha. That even a lion and a bear, your servant is able to fight against. This is David HaMelech speaking to Shaul, trying to convince Shaul to allow him to go and fight the Pelishtim, and he's telling Shaul, I'm so strong I can fight against a lion and against a bear. So the point is, the Gemara is saying, just like the Gemara said before the Svara, that the landowner could say, if you would have planted here, even though grasshoppers attacked this area, a nest would have happened to me. How do you know they would have eaten from my property? So over here as well, why can't the owner of the sheep say to the shepherd, you walked away? You're saying that you couldn't save it anyways? Who says? Maybe if you would have been there, you would have been, a nest would have happened, you would have been able to save them. So the Gemara says, well, if we're relying on Nisim, so then Mishum, the Amalei, so now the shepherd could say back to the owner, If you are actually worthy that a nes should happen for you, like you're saying, so then so then you wouldn't even need me to be there to save your sheep from this lion or from this deer, from this wolf. Then a nes would have happened for you, like the nes that happened by Rab Chanina ben Daisa. The Masya and Easy Dovi Bekarnayu. What happened was his goats came into the city carrying bears on top of their horns. What happened over there is the people were accusing Rab Chanina ben Daisa that his goats are eating from their property. And Rab Chanina ben Daisa said that if it's true that they're eating from your property, let the bears come and attack them and eat them up. But if it's not true that they're eating from the property, let them walk into the city with bears on top of their horns. And that's exactly what happened. So over here as well, you're saying that the owner could say to the shepherd that a nes could have happened. If you're relying on a nes, so fine. So the shepherd could say to the owner, hey, even a greater nes could have happened. You don't even need me to save your sheep from what was attacked over here. But the Gemara doesn't accept this. The Gemara says, well, this is a much bigger miracle. The name Malay, the owner could say to the shepherd, maybe I'm not worthy of such a great miracle, like you're describing, that the bears on top of the horns of the goats. But maybe I would have been worthy for a smaller miracle to happen. That if you were there, you would have been on site. You would have been able to fight off the wolf or the lion. So therefore, you should still be responsible for the fact that you weren't there. So that Kashya, the Gemara leaves as a question. The Gemara doesn't answer this. Now, going back to the halacha of our Mishnah regarding a person that planted and it got destroyed or it got eaten up. So Tanachad, we learned in one braise, Pam Rishayna, after it happens one time, and then the Shniya happens a second time, Zaira, you should plant it again. It still could grow back, and then he'll be able to, you won't have to deduct any of the pay from the owner. Shlishis, but then a third time, in Zaira. He's not obligated to plant it a third time. Once it happens twice, so then he can deduct the pay if this is a disaster in the whole area. But V'tanya Yidach, in a different brayso we learn, Shlish Zaira, even a third time he should plant again, only Revius ain't Zaira. A fourth time he doesn't have to plant again. So how do we reconcile these two brayses? Says the Gemara, Leikashia, there's no question here. Ha Kerebi, Ha Kerab Shimon Gamliel. The first brayse is Rebbe, the second is Rab Shimon Gamliel. Ha Kerebi, the Oma betrei Zimni Ava Chazaka. Rebbe says twice establishes a Chazaka. This is regarding a man that marries one woman and she dies, and another one, or he dies, that is. A woman gets married to one man and he dies, a second man and he dies. The question is now, could she get married a third time? We see that her husbands die. So Rebbe says after 2 times, it's a chazaka that her husbands die. And Rab Shimon Gamliel, the second brayse is Rab Shimon Gamliel, only after 3 times is it considered to be a chazaka. Reish Lakish says over here about this, what this brayse here said, that after 1 time you plant it again, a second time or even a third time. This is only if what happened was he planted it once and it grew, and grasshoppers ate it up. And then we're saying that he should try and plant again. But if he planted and it didn't grow anything yet, didn't grow at all, so then we don't say try a second time, try a third time, and then over. It's chazakah, so you don't have to try again. In such a case, matzi amalei balakarka, the owner of the property says to the worker, Kol yemei zera zara lavazal. If it didn't grow the first time you planted, maybe it was too early in the season. You have to plant later on. Plant all the way till the end of the season again and again until maybe it'll begin to grow. Now, v'yademus, until when is considered to be the end of the season? Rav Papa says, ad asu arise medabra, until the time in the year that when the workers come in from the field, which Rashi says is the 10th hour in the day, the kaima kima areshayu, and the mazel, the constellation kima, which is the tail of the mazel tle, is going to be right in the center of the sky above their head. When it's that time period in the year and that mazel is in that place above their head, then you know that it's the end of the season. When is this? Chodesh Adar. That's basically the end of the winter. That's already considered to be the end of the season. Now the cheshbon of the mazalas, why exactly this mazel of kima is at the center of the sky at this time of the day, at this time of the year. There's a long Rashi here that explains all the details about how exactly the seder of the mazalas are beyond the scope of this share right now. Okay, but the Gemara here now asks on this, Meis Rab Shimon Gamliel, Mishum Rab Meir Aimer. Brayso says that Rab Shimon Gamliel said in the name of Rab Meir. And Rab Shimon ben Menasya also said regarding the seasons of the year. How do we understand the 6 seasons that there are in the year, which are mentioned in Parshas Noach after the Mabul? So he says like this: Chatzi Tishrei Marcheshvan v'Chatzi Kislev, half of the month of Tishrei and then the month of Cheshvan, and half of Kislev Zera. That's the time period of planting. Chatzi Kislev Tevis and v'Chatzi Shvat, half of Kislev and the whole month of Tevis, and half of Shvat Chayrev. That's the winter, the coldest. Chatzi Shvat it is, sorry. Chatzi Shvat Adar v'Chatzi Nisan, half of Shvat, and then the month of Adar, and then Nisan Kar. It's already the end of the winter. It's not very cold, but it's still cold. Chatzi Nisan, then half of Nisan, Iyar, the month of Iyar, v'Chatzi Sivan and half of Sivan, Kotzer. That's the time, the harvest season. And Chatzi Sivan and Tammuz and v'Chatzi Av, then half of Sivan, Tammuz, and half of Av, Kayitz, that's the time when it's the hottest, when you put out the produce in the field to dry from the heat. And then Chatzi Av, Elul, v'Chatzi Tishrei, the last part of half of Elul, and again half of Av, Elul, and half of Tishrei, Chaim. That's the end. It's not very as hot as the middle of the summer, but it's also the end of the summer, the heat. That's the 6 seasons of the year. Rabbi Yehuda Moine mi Tishrei. Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't start counting the 6 seasons from half of Tishrei, from Tezvav Tishrei. He would actually start counting from the beginning of Tishrei. Rab Shimon Moine mi Mar Cheshvan. Rab Shimon would start counting from not Tishrei, but from the beginning of Cheshvan. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so you would count Tishrei, Cheshvan. That's the time of Zera, to plant. Instead of counting half Tishrei and Cheshvan and half of Kislev, he would start from the beginning of Tishrei. According to Rab Shimon, he would count Cheshvan and Kislev are the 2 full months that are the months for planting. So now what do we see from here? When we talk about the months of Zera, the months of planting, what are those times? Man Mekel B'Kulu, who's the one that's the most lenient, that delays the time of planting till the latest time? Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon is the one that says that it goes all the way till when? Till the end of Kislev. But nobody says that it goes as late as we mentioned before, when the Kima is in the center of the sky, but the 10th hour of the day, which is during the month of Adar. So nobody says that the landowner could say to him, you should plant until the month of Adar. And says the Gemara, there's no question from the halacha before to this braise, because the kibla b'charfi, because over here he received from him to plant in this property wheat, for example, or things that are similar to wheat, which are planted in the beginning of the winter. And over here, that's the braise. So that's only the latest that goes is until Kislev, the end of Kislev. The kibla minei ba'afli. But before we were speaking about a person that got to work in the field to plant what different things? To plant barley or beans, things that could be planted further into the winter all the way until other time. Going back to the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda in Kibla Mimenu B'Mois, that even when there is a regional disaster, you can't deduct from the pay of the landowner if your deal with him is that you're paying him rent money. So then any disaster does not change the amount of money that you have to pay. It's only if you're paying it with the produce, then if there's a disaster, you can deduct from that. So the Gemara here brings that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, because there was a story, Ahu Gavre, the Kabul Arel Mizreb, Buhu Tami, there was a person that received the property to work in it, and he was to plant in it tumi, garlic, agude, dinar, malkasaba, at the edge of the river Malkasaba, it's the name of this river, Bezuzi, for money, if he's going to, and it was for pay for money. It's similar to the case that Rabbi Yehuda was talking about in the Mishnah, that he's not paying a percent of the produce, but he's paying money, regular rental basically. What happened? Istachanar Malkasaba. This river got clogged. People upstream from this river went and clogged the river and diverted it to a different direction. So now there's a disaster here. Nobody in this area now has any water for their property. They asked Rave about this renter in this property. Could he deduct from the pay of the landowner because now he doesn't have water here? The fact that this river was diverted, that's not something that usually happens. Makis Medinahi, and this is a regional disaster for everybody in the area, and therefore Zil Nachile, you can go and deduct from his pay because of this disaster. But so the Rabbanan asked Rav about his psaktin. But in our Mishnah we learned, Rabbi Yehuda if you accepted, you got your renter in this field and you're paying money, even if there's a regional disaster, it doesn't matter. If the payment is money, you can't deduct from the payment because of what happened. So Rav said, we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, even when the payment is money and there's a disaster here in the area, you could deduct from the payment to the landowner. A person is a worker in the field, and he makes up that he's going to pay 10 kor chitim for the year. So here we're talking also about a choicher, a person that's paying a certain set amount, not a person that's giving a percent of what the property produced. So now veloksa, and the property, the produce came out very bad quality. He gives that set percent that he made he's going to give to the owner, and he gives from the bad quality that this field produced now. If the wheat that the property produced were especially good. So now the worker can't say to the landowner, that is minashuk. We made up a certain percent of wheat, a set amount that I'm going to give you. I don't want to give you from this very good quality that grew in this field. I'll give you that percent, I'll buy it in the marketplace, I'll give you. No, you have to give it from this field. Whether for the bad, whether for the good, the set amount that you have to give comes from this field. So there was an individual, the Kaval Ara La Spasta, he received a field, and he made up that he's going to plant in it aspasta, which is basically animal feed. And this aspasta actually grows very quickly. It grows in 30 days, you have already ripe aspasta. And what was the deal? Bekuri the sari, that he's going to pay the landowner a kur, a certain amount of barley. So what happened? Of the aspasta, the field produced the aspasta very quickly, as I mentioned, in 30 days. And then v'chorsha, he plowed it right away. And v'zara sari, and then he went and planted barley there. That wasn't what he made up with the owner, that he's going to plant barley, but he went and he planted barley. And v'laku hanisari. Now the barley that he planted there were bad quality. Now the question is, do we apply the halacha that it says in the Mishnah that when you make up a set amount of what you're going to pay for the landowner of produce, you take from what the field produced, even if it produces bad quality? Do we apply that here in this story as well? Rav Chaviva asked Ravina the Shaila, what's the halacha here? Do I say that because it's bad quality that grew now in this field, it doesn't matter? A Mishnah says that that's you pay from what the quality of this field produced, and therefore you give him this bad quality. Or in this case it's different. We don't give him from this field. He has to give him good quality barley that he told him he's going to give him. So Amalei Ravina answered, this case is talking not the same like what it said in our Mishnah. Midami, how could you compare? Over there in the Mishnah, the master said that you should plant this and this produce in the field. And the field is not producing what it's supposed to be producing. But you followed what he said it should be producing, and the field didn't do what the master said it should do. So in such a case, it's the loss of the master, and you just give him the bad quality from the field. But of the Arash l'chusad over here, this field, you were supposed to plant aspasta, it produced aspasta very well. So now the fact that you went and planted afterwards the barley here, which you weren't supposed to plant there, you can't give the owner bad quality barley. You have to go and get him good quality barley. Another story, a person got a vineyard from his friend. Ve'eser doni chamre. And there was they made up that he's going to pay him 10 barrels of wine. Takif ahu chamre, or maybe it means that there was 10 barrels that it produces from this vineyard. What happened over here with this wine? Takif ahu chamre. So the wine became sour, it became vinegar. So now the question is, when he has to pay the percent of the wine to the owner, could he say to him, this is the wine that I produced from your property. It went bad. Sorry, this is what you get. Like it said in our Mishnah, you give from whatever quality this property produced. So Rav Kahana thought to say, Hainu Masnisa. Yeah, we apply what it says in our Mishnah. That loksa, if the property produced bad quality, nice and loy miteicha. You pay the owner from the bad quality from this property. Ravashi says you can't compare. Mi domi, there's no comparison. In our Mishnah, like we said before, the property was supposed to produce good quality and it did not. So that's the bad luck of the owner. So therefore you pay whatever it produced. Over here, this property produced good grapes. The vineyard produced good grapes. Elamai later, when he made the wine, and then the wine turned vinegar, that's actually the bad luck of the worker, that his wine that he produced now turned into vinegar. So therefore over here, he can't now give this vinegar to the owner. He's going to have to give him good wine. Now, my Ravashi, but Ravashi will admit that we will compare to our Mishnah, the Invi, the Kaddim, if the grapes themselves that were produced, that grew in this vineyard, were actually bad quality from when they grew, because they were very wormy. So then in such a case, you do give the owner whatever quality it is. And also, same thing also with a field, that the quality of what grew in the field was bad, and the grain was already cut from the field, but it was still spread out in the field. So that grain spread out in the field during the time in the summer when it spread out in the field, that's when it went bad. Then we say that it is the bad luck of the owner that it went bad, and therefore you will be able to give him this bad quality that's here from this field.